Gentlemen, what is going on today? My name is Ryan Mickler, and I am the host and the founder of this podcast and the Order of Man movement. I want to welcome you here as I do every week. If you are new, this is a podcast and a movement dedicated to giving you the tools, the resources, and specifically with this podcast, the conversations you need to thrive as a man. Now, I've got to say, I already recorded this podcast once about 2 hours ago, and come to find out the audio file was corrupted. So this is actually round two. I've got a few notes here. I'm not scripted or anything like that. So let's hope that the second time I record this particular podcast is just as good as the first. If it's not, you'll never know. All right, guys. Going to get into it today. Not a whole lot of announcements. In fact, no announcements because I want to talk about this today. I titled this particular conversation, Modernity and the Demise of Masculinity. Now, it is apparent to me that the modern times that we have attributed or contributed, I should say, to the ultimate and slow, painstaking demise of masculinity. I think this is very, very evident in society today. I know there's a lot of conflicting ideas about this, and I know there's a lot of people who seem to think that if I ever talk about this demise of masculinity, that somehow I'm painting men as the victim. That's the furthest thing from the truth. I'm going to explain a little bit about what I mean there. But before we get into that, I think that we all are familiar with that quote or that term. We've all heard it. How does it go? Strong men create good times create weak men create hard times create strong men. And I think that's a pretty good summary. Of course, it's a lot more nuanced than that, but a pretty good summary of what we're dealing with right now. We as a society are standing on the shoulders of the greatest generation. We're standing on the shoulders of men who have toiled and worked and done significantly more than any of us. Well, I shouldn't say any of us, significantly more than us generally as a society today have done. A lot of the times I think about my military service, for example, and people thank me for my military service, and I try to, as best I can, accept that gratitude graciously and with humility. But at the same time, I think to myself, man, I don't hold anything to some of these warriors and soldiers who have sacrificed so much and in some cases given their all to protect our way of life, to protect the things they see valuable. And I wonder if we'd be willing to do those types of things in this day and age. I think if push came to shove, a lot of us would. I think the overwhelming, at least I hope the overwhelming majority of us who are listening to this podcast and tuned into the movement to reclaim and restore masculinity would certainly do so, I would hope. But it's a question I ask myself quite often. And am I the man that I'm fully capable of being and becoming? The answer is certainly no, but I'm on the path. And unfortunately, what I see in society is a decline. And a lot of this is because we've created this environment where everything is so easy and everything is so convenient, and we've fallen into comfort and complacency. And if we can't remain vigilant about the threats that we potentially face, although they may not be as prevalent as a life and death type situation, then I think we're going to find ourselves in a bad situation. And maybe it's not ourselves, but certainly our children and our grandchildren. And I've taken this battle upon myself to attempt to come up with some solutions in how we can deal with this demise of masculinity in this relatively easy time in which we live. And I don't think anybody would disagree with me on that. I mean, if you're hungry, you go down to the convenience store, gas station, or grocery store, and you get some food. If you're cold, like I am today, you turn up the heater. If you're hot, you turn on the air conditioning. If you want to get to a different place, you hop in your car or hop in a train or a plane, and you get there within a matter of hours. And that 100 years ago would take days and days, if not months, to get to that same location. So I'm not complaining. I mean, I'm sitting behind this amazing desk, using this microphone and this camera and this computer, and I've got the lights on and it's climate controlled in this beautiful home in which we live. I'm not complaining about it. I'm just saying that we've got to find a way to embrace what it means to be a man, that of a protector, provider, and presider. If you look at all of those components, they all represent an element of service to other people. Protect, provide, preside, serve other individuals. And in order to do that, you've got to bear the burden of responsibility. And unfortunately, I see that there's a large percentage of men and young boys who have not learned how to make themselves capable of bearing that weight. And I think it's going to create some real unfortunate circumstances. A lot of this conversation I wanted to talk with you about today was spurred on by the podcast I did earlier this week with Charlie Kirk. And we had some great conversations. A lot of people agreed, a lot of people disagreed. But it was interesting because the people who disagreed, one thing I saw a lot was that they felt that as I talk about this demise of masculinity, and look, let me be clear on this. I'm very hesitant, or maybe not, maybe even against the idea of using the terms war on masculinity, war on men, attack or assault on masculinity. And I say that because words have meaning. And I'm not sure that it isn't a war or an attack on masculinity. I think it's just the gradual erosion and decay of the foundations of what it means to be a man, traditionally. And it's hindered a lot of men. It's hurt a lot of men in a lot of ways. And so I wanted to share some of this stuff with you today. It's not based in victimhood, which is what a lot of people said. I think being a victim is somebody who might recognize a problem, but perpetually remains in that problem or continues the same behavior and expects and hopes for a different outcome. Somebody who takes pride in being at the mercy of other people. But it's certainly not somebody who's proposing solutions. And I feel like if there's one thing that we've done within the Order of Man movement and podcast is we continually, over the past nearly 6 years now, proposed all sorts of solutions via this podcast, the courses, our exclusive brotherhood, the events that we do, proposed all sorts of solutions that move us from a potential victimhood type mentality into a victor mentality, where we can recognize what's actually happening. We can look at it as objectively as possible. We can open our minds and our eyes to the possibility that maybe some of this exists, and then we can actually do something about it. And that's the point. The point isn't just to complain or to mope or to gripe or to bitch or to moan. It's to actually move the needle towards helping you as a man, a father, a husband, a business owner, a community leader, a coach, a mentor, a brother, help you find and develop the meaning and satisfaction and purpose that comes when you step into who it is you are meant to be, a man. So what I'd like to do today, first and foremost, is share with you a couple of points and places in which I think this erosion of masculinity is coming from, and then more importantly, what we can do about it. I mean, like I said, ultimately, that's the most important thing, that we actually figure out a path forward. So let's break this down. The first place I think this demise is coming from is governmental. And by the way, guys, if you disagree with me on this, that's great. Let's have a conversation about it. But here's the beauty of what I'm going to share with you. If you agree with me, good. What I'm going to share with you as far as a path forward is going to serve you. It's going to help you become more effective. If you don't agree with me, and it's very possible that there's going to be a lot of you who don't, and that's fine too. The beauty of what I'm going to share with you is that the path I'm going to illustrate here in the next little bit is actually going to help you. Whether you agree or whether you disagree, the things that I'm going to share you, the path forward is going to serve you, and it's going to serve the people you care about well. All right, so let's talk about this. Government. Look, the bottom line is that weak men are more easily manipulated and more easily controlled. And I think ultimately the powers that be want to be able to control and manipulate the last line of defense in a free and liberated society. And that's men. That has historically been men, that is currently men, and it will always be men. And if you're more easily manipulated or controlled, then obviously the control and the power and the authority goes to those who are controlling you. We see this in a couple of different places that I wanted to point out. Number one, we see this in the school system. The fact of the matter is that the school system is stacked against young men. It truly is. If you want to look into some additional work and resources, because it's deeper than what I want to get to in this podcast today, you can look at Dr. Warren Farrell's book, The Boy Crisis. I think if you're watching this on video, I believe, without looking at it, I believe that's The Boy Crisis right there. So The Boy Crisis by Dr. Warren Farrell. And then there's also two other books, both by Dr. Leonard Sachs. One is called Boys Adrift, and the other is Why Gender Matters. So if you want to get into how the school system is stacked against our young men, I would highly encourage that you go take a look, have a listen, have a read, and you can see that there's some real threats to the way that our young men, our boys, are being raised. In addition to what's happening in the school system, I would like to point out the family court system. There are some real problems with men having access to their sons. And obviously, this creates a problem. We see a rise of fatherless homes. Little Timmy and little Sally are growing up without dad increasingly. And it's a real shame. At best, it's a real shame. It's destructive to them. It's destructive to fathers. And it's dangerous to society. Guys, the court systems are stacked against men. It's unfortunate. And I would say that you have to, as a man, you have to protect yourself, right? Marry and commit to the right woman. Bring kids into the world when both of you are prepared to do that. And make sure that you are protected so that you can maintain and preserve your rights to father your children. That's very much needed in society. So this is a multifaceted approach. Number one is the government, the school systems, and the family court system. Number two, take a look at the media. All right, if you look at the media, men are portrayed as idiots, as dopes, as goofballs, like they're never serious, they're never committed, they're never the type of men that I've been fortunate enough to have in my life. You look at other commercials that try to undermine what masculinity is and paint it in this negative light, in terms like toxic masculinity have permeated popular culture and the library of words they use to attempt to undermine what it means to be a man. Now, I know there's a lot of people who say, well, toxic masculinity is real. Look, I understand what people are saying, but the whole idea and the whole reason I don't use that term is because it's an attempt, at least by some, to conflate masculinity with inherently being toxic. And it's certainly not. Can it be used for good? Absolutely. Can it be used for bad? Absolutely. And I think those who use the term toxic masculinity, the majority of them would say it's when masculinity is used for negative outcomes. But again, I'm very wary to conflate the two terms. But again, media is continually portraying men as the losers, as the dopes, as the idiots. And then you have these movements in addition to the media. And this is more along the lines of, I would say, culture in general. But you have these movements like the feminist movement, third wave feminism, that hate men, that believe all men are bad. You know, these are individuals, primarily women, or these white knight type men who have potentially been damaged by men. They've had a bad experience. And none of what I'm about to say is meant to diminish an individual's horrific, potentially, experience. But if you have one bad experience and you paint everybody with that broad paintbrush and assume that just because you had one bad experience with a man that all men are like that, it's a sign that you haven't healed correctly, and it's certainly a sign of immaturity. There's certainly emotional trauma, and again, I don't want to diminish any of that because I feel for any individual who's gone through any horrific experience at the hands of a man or anybody else. But we need to not conflate all evil, all toxicity, all that's wrong with the world, the tyrannical patriarchy with men generally. Because that hasn't been the case for me. And it certainly, well, I should say probably hasn't been the case for you. You've had great men come into your life, and you've had some not great men come into your life. But certainly all men aren't the enemy, and we're not the bad guys, okay? Now, the third component of this is the medical community. The medical community has jumped on the bandwagon and has attempted to undermine masculinity. And one area I'm specifically referring to is the American Psychological Association's quasi-study on masculinity that they did several years ago. And what they had said, or their findings reported, that the traits and characteristics that we would generally attribute or characterize as masculine are somehow inherently toxic to young boys. That of, I believe they use the term stoicism, aggressiveness, and competitiveness, which in and of themselves, none of those factors are inherently negative. In fact, I would say they can all be, when used appropriately, very, very good, but they're not inherently bad or evil or destructive to our young boys. I mean, stoicism is simply the control of your emotions. Actually, I'm not going to say it that way. It's the understanding of your emotions, because control is what people think men do. Don't cry. That's not what anybody is saying. Okay? I've cried. My sons have seen me cry. My sons have cried. And at times I'll tell them, hey, now's not the time to cry. It's not appropriate. Stop crying. And people would say I'm toxic because because I do that. And then there's other times where, I offer a shoulder to cry on because it's appropriate. But stoicism is simply the understanding of your emotions so you can use them as an effective tool for producing effective outcomes for you and the people that you care about. It's understanding your emotions so you can actually do something with them, not suppress them, not hide them, and not be overly emotional where you're allowing them to dictate your course of action. Now, aggression and dominance, again, under the right set of circumstances, those are very good things. There are plenty of situations in the corporate environment, for example, where a man would need to be aggressive, to be able to share and add value, to be first to market, to compete with other people, with other companies, because it drives him to thrive and to excel. I know I operate very, very well on a healthy dose of competition. And it's my job as a father and a leader in the community and a leader of this organization and movement to teach my sons and the people that I'm responsible for how to use these characteristics that are coursing through our veins as men for productive outcomes. The other component of this with the medical community that I've seen is, and this goes back to my comments on the boy crisis by Dr. Warren Farrell and what I was saying with the school system, is that anytime anymore, it seems like a young man steps outside of some perceived limitations or boundaries by a school teacher or administrative board, just because he might be a little rambunctious, a little hyper, a little lack of focus, that he's popped with pain medications and pills and sedation tactics, and it's just not healthy. I mean, it's not healthy. You should see the statistics on the overdiagnosis of ADD and ADHD. It's horrific. And much of what the medical community is doing is sedating our young men and asking them to act more like women. It's shameful. It's a travesty. And not to mention, you have other components of the medical community who are suppressing hormones for those who might believe at a young age that they're a different gender or a different sex. Guys, this is not a healthy thing. It's very, very dangerous. So all of this, if you kind of tie it up in a little bow, is, I use the term doctrine of popular culture. I've used that a lot. And it's a danger. It's a threat. Again, it's not an attack, but it's a threat. And it's something that we need to be aware of, is that there's this doctrine of popular culture, which says that you need to be promiscuous, that you don't want to commit to any one person, that traditional family values or traditional church values are not as effective or useful as they once were, that you can, quit on a relationship or other things that you're doing because you don't want to do it, that everybody's special regardless of how they show up and what they do. It's a real shame. It's a real shame, and it's damaging to men. And here's the result, is that more and more men are feeling depressed, anxious, lack of drive, lack of motivation, lack of clarity, lack of ability to lead other people, and potentially, at its worst, suicidal. Because society has told them to act like women. If only more men acted like women, then the world would be a better place. I haven't seen any evidence of that. Yeah, you can show me some anecdotal evidence where a woman might be running an organization or the head of a country and think, well, see, she's a woman and that's why they're doing better. Well, correlation doesn't equal causation. Guys, what we need in society is strong, honorable, committed, capable men. And again, I want to reiterate and be very clear that I'm not painting men in some sort of victimhood role. I mean, we live in the best time we've ever had in the history of mankind. More wealth, more abundance, more prosperity, more liberty, more freedom. If you want to look at any metric that you could possibly measure with how it relates to the success, the overall and general success of mankind, we live in the best time we ever could. So I'm not here to tell you that we're the victims and that we need to play the victims and that there's this enemy that's going to attack us. I'm just stating that we need to be aware of some of these things so we can address them and we can move forward in a way that's going to help everybody continue to thrive, continue on the same path. I had a gentleman, as I was talking earlier this week about the potential demise of masculinity, I had a gentleman say, well, the fabric of society is still intact. We still have freedoms and you can still worship how you want and you can still pursue a career and you can still build wealth and all of those things are still intact. And I agreed with him. I said, absolutely, those things are intact. But without men to maintain and preserve the freedoms that we enjoy, those things are under threat. And that's my whole goal with Order of Man, is to make and create and enlist an army of men who are willing, able, and capable of defending themselves, defending their families, defending loved ones and people who can't defend themselves, willing to lead honorably with virtue and dignity, and that they're willing to provide the resources that their families and community members need to thrive. That's what this is about. So, second part of this podcast is all designed around and geared towards how do we fix this then? How do we get back on the right track? How do we maintain keeping men in the right perspective and in the right place, which is that of leadership and authority and credibility and influence with other people? Guys, number one, you have to recognize that there's a problem. All right, so many of you are not willing to say that there's a problem. Maybe you don't acknowledge it. Maybe you don't believe that's the case, or maybe you're just not all that interested in. I would say it's a pretty good time to get interested in masculinity, manliness, and helping the men in your life, including yourself, step up to the plate. I would say this is a pretty good time to do that. Because if we can't recognize there's a problem, there's nothing we can do about it. You wouldn't go, if you're playing football, into a football game against another team without trying to scout the other team, without trying to get some film to be able to watch so that you can create a defensive strategy, an offensive strategy. You wouldn't go into battle without knowing your enemy to some degree. It's why we send in forward observers and scouts to be able to see what the enemies are doing and gather intel so that we can create a plan and a course of action. And that's what I'm talking about when it comes to recognizing a problem. You have to recognize that there's something going on. And I'm not saying it's dire, and I'm not saying it's catastrophic. I'm simply saying we're on a decline, and it needs to be addressed. Number two, make yourself more capable. Guys, we've got to make ourselves capable in all ways. Strong, bold, resilient, smart, intelligent, articulate. Every way we possibly can, we've got to make ourselves more capable of leading ourselves and leading the people in our lives. Look, I talk with a lot of guys who they want to be influential. They want to lead. They want to make their dent in the universe. And while I can certainly appreciate all of that, you've got to lead yourself. It all starts with you. You can't turn outwards and fix other people until you learn to turn inward and fix yourself. So again, this is the antithesis of victimhood. Victimhood is remaining there forever. The antithesis of it, to be a victor, is to recognize the problem and do something about it. What do you need to do about it, guys? And look, here's the deal. We as men are measured by the value that we add to society. I contrast that a little bit with women. And this is something I've been thinking about over the past, I would say just 24 hours or so. So I'm going to talk out or think out loud here with you a little bit. I've been thinking, maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. I'd love to hear what you think on this. But I think women, by their very nature, are inherently valuable. Right? They take the raw resources. I mean, I even look at the act of procreation. The man fertilizes, provides the raw resources. The woman nurtures a fetus, a baby in her womb for 9 months and provides sustenance and life-supporting nutrients to that baby. And then that baby is born and we have the act of procreation and birth. It's a beautiful thing. I think women are inherently valuable. I think about my wife. You know, she takes this house, the raw ingredients of a house, the sticks and the plaster and the tiles and the flooring and the carpet, and she takes all of the raw ingredients and she turns this into a beautiful home. I think women are generally very good at that. They're inherently valuable. Men, on the other hand, we have to earn our value. You know, we have to deliberately and intentionally choose to be valuable. We have to develop a new set of skills. We have to ask for promotions and add value into our communities and add value into businesses. And we need to supply the raw ingredients, which means we need to have a skill to be able to supply those raw ingredients. Again, I'm just riffing and kind of just thinking out loud here, but we as men are defined by the value that we add. And if you want to be the type of man that you're capable of being, then you've got to add value. You've got to make yourself capable of adding value. And that's where it all starts. It starts with you. I've told you guys this. When my wife and I went through our separation years ago, I blamed her for a lot of the demise of our relationship at that point. How could she do this? Why was she being disloyal? Why wasn't she doing the things that a quote-unquote good wife should do? I said those things and worse to myself and to her. And it wasn't until I came to the realization that, maybe I had a bigger part to play than I was initially giving myself credit for. And as I began to take responsibility of my life and stop focusing so much on trying to change her and instead focused on changing myself, I noticed that she started responding. And not only did she start responding, my colleagues started responding. My clients started responding. But it wasn't about control. It wasn't about manipulation. It was about influence, which means that people are voluntarily choosing to be led by you because they see something valuable in you and they want some of it for themselves. And if you have an abundance of it, because you're focused heavily on yourself, then you have room to give. Number 3, guys, from there, after you begin to work on yourself, then and only then can you expand your sphere of influence. Your sphere of influence starts with the people in your house, your wife, your children, potentially your parents, whoever it might be in your household, in your immediate circle. Then it goes to friends, neighbors, colleagues, co-workers. And then it can expand from there into the political arena, potentially, or a youth sports team that you coach. But it continues to widen as you, at the center of this whole plan, make yourself more and more capable. And the more you can focus on yourself, the more abundance that you have to give to other people, to serve a greater number of people in a greater and bigger capacity. But guys, we have to have that servant mindset. Seems to me there's a lot of guys, and this is the victimhood mentality, is they've been hurt. Guys have been hurt by society, some perceived slight by society or perceived slight by a woman. Maybe they had a bad relationship and they got themselves into financial trouble, and maybe there's even some truth in that they can't see their children or something like that. And what they've done is just like I said, some women do, these men have painted the broad stroke that society is the enemy, that women are the enemy. And so rather than engaging and figuring out ways to come up with some solutions, they disengage entirely. This is the incel movement. Involuntary celibates. Somebody did something to me, and that's why I don't have what I want. All right, guys, that's the antithesis of what I'm talking about here. I'm simply suggesting the threats, and I'm giving us strategies and suggestions to overcome those threats and to live a better and more fulfilling life. So again, number 3 is to expand. Once you have the capacity to serve yourself, then your family, then your friends, colleagues, coworkers, neighbors, then it might expand from there. And the 4th component of this, guys, is legacy. All right, the issues that we see, and just like that quote I shared with you earlier, strong men create, let me see if I can say it, strong men create good times create weak men create hard times create strong men. I don't know that the trajectory that we're on right now is going to be solved in this generation. I don't know that it's going to be solved in my lifetime. I think what we see is the demise of masculinity is going to be solved by our children or going to be solved by our grandchildren. But that's all based on what we as men are willing and capable and able to do. And it's a lot of the reason why when I hear people say, I don't want to bring kids into this world, I cringe a little bit. It's a little upsetting because I can't think of a better way than to enlist an army of millions and millions of men who are tuned into this podcast and tapped into what we're doing and rallying around the mission of reclaiming and restoring masculinity, and having those men go raise righteous sons and daughters who honor masculinity, who honor femininity, who believe in what it means to be a man, and their daughters believe in what it means to be a woman, and they cooperate with each other, and they recognize that they aren't enemies. They aren't at odds with each other. In fact, they're very complementary of each other, and we work best when we're like that. But guys, it's about leaving a legacy. It's about recognizing that you've got to think beyond not just you, but beyond your life. I really feel like when we have this long-term approach and this long-term perspective, that life just gets better. You know, so many of us make decisions on the short term. What can I get now? How much money can I make right now? What's in it for me today? And we do that at the expense of the long-term ramifications of the decisions that we make. You know, like what if you made decisions based on what was going to happen over the next 20 years? It might be a more difficult 2 or 3 years, but over a course of 20 years, it would be incredible. But what if we did that over a lifetime? What if we did that generationally? It's actually one of the things, for all their faults, that I actually admire about families like the Rockefellers and Kennedys. And I know there's faults there, but at the same time, these are generational type thinking, and it served their family well. Again, we're not going to talk about the faults with that today. That's for a whole other podcast. But it is something interesting to consider. Are you creating an empire? I am. At least I'm trying to. And I sit down with my sons and my daughter. Every day we talk about what they're going to do and how they're going to behave and how they're going to act. And when we run across this situation, what are we going to do? And I'm trying to make them strong and bold and creative and assertive and passionate and courageous. And that's what it's going to take. It's not just me. It's not just you. It's our sons and our daughters, our grandsons, our granddaughters. And the legacy is what's going to continue to drive not just this mission, but what we believe is the betterment of society. So guys, again, this is just some thoughts. That's what the Friday Field Notes are all about. I've been thinking a lot about modern times and how easy we have it and the luxuries and the creature comforts that we enjoy. And I've been thinking about how that might be and pertain to the demise and the undermining of masculinity. Again, not the attack, not the assault, the demise. That's the language I choose to use because I think that's more representative of what is happening. So, guys, here it is. Let me recap. Let's not be victims. All right, let's not just spin our wheels and say, oh, these are all the problems. And I'm not here to bitch and moan and complain and gripe about it with you here today. That's not what I'm doing. Okay, I'm here to illustrate and underline and highlight some of the threats that I see and then talk about how we can deal with them. So here's the trifecta of threats that I see. Government. All right, we've got the school system. We've got the family court system. Those are a couple areas. The media, portraying men as idiots. And then we have the cultural movements like the feminist movement and things like this. Entertaining, culture, media, that sort of thing. Undermining masculinity at every turn and making the men out to be dunces and idiots and morons and the enemy. And then the third component of that is the medical community, right? You have the American Psychological Associations that's getting on board. You have hormone blockers for young men. And then you also have what was the third component? Oh, the sedation of our young boys because of things like ADHD, ADD, that sort of thing. And then here's the strategy. Number one, recognize there's a problem, all right? Look, and if you don't recognize there's a problem, there's nothing you can do about it. And maybe there's nothing you want to do about it. And maybe you genuinely don't believe there's a problem. Well, okay, the 3 strategies I shared with you are still going to serve you well, okay? So number one, recognize there's a problem. Number 2, fix yourself first. Work on yourself. Don't try to change the world without first changing yourself, okay? Change yourself first. Fix yourself first. Deal with that. Become strong. Become skilled. Start making money. Get in shape. Start leading. Learn how to be courageous. Learn how to communicate effectively. Make yourself more capable. Then, from there, point number 3 is you can expand that circle of influence. Expand the circle of influence to your family, to your friends, your colleagues, your coworkers, your neighbors, your city, your state, even at the national level. Or international, like a movement like this. The only reason I'm capable of being able to expand my influence internationally is because I continue daily to do the work on myself. And the 4th component is think about this generationally. Legacy. Leave a legacy. Let's leave the world a better place than we were when we found it. You know, I was walking with my oldest son the other day. We were setting up some decoys, and we were out hunting, and we found some trash. And usually I try to bring a trash bag with me when I'm out just walking in our field because inevitably trash blows in there and stuff. And so I'm picking up trash, and he was asking me about it. I said, it's just better to leave a place nicer, cleaner, better off than when you found it. Feels good, looks good, and it's our responsibility. And I think that can certainly be true of culture, of this country, of the world in general. But it's not about being a victim. It's about recognizing there's problems, looking at it from a long-term perspective, coming up with the solutions, and making ourselves capable of doing so. All right, guys, that's what I've got for you today. Please leave me some messages. Hit me up on email or on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube comments, wherever you're doing the social media thing. Let me know what you think. I talked about some concepts that maybe I haven't necessarily hit on before, so I'd like to riff on those. If you agree, great. If you disagree, great. Let's have some civil discussion about it, and we'll continue the conversation on the interwebs. All right, guys, we'll be back next week. Until then, go out there, take action, and become the man you are meant to be.